So we're going to continue with this study. This is Boot Camp for Lambs Part 2, Conflict and Disappointment. If someone would, please read Judges chapter 8.
Now, the men of Ephraim said to him, "Why have you done this to us by not calling us when you went to fight with the Midianites?" And they reprimanded him sharply. So he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is it not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb, and Zeb. And what was I able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger towards him subdued when he said that. When Gideon came to the Jordan, he and the 300 men who were with him crossed over, exhausted but still in pursuit. Then he said to the men of Sukkot, "Please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian." And the leaders of Sukkot said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give you your bread, that we should give bread to your army?" So Gideon said, "For this cause, when the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." Then he went up from there to Penuel and spoke to them in the same way. And the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Sukkot had answered. So he also spoke to the men of Penuel, saying, "When I come back in peace, I will tear down this tower." Now, Zebah and Zalmunna were at Elkor, and their armies with them, about 15,000. All things were left of the army of the people of Bees, for 120,000 men who drew the sword had fallen. Then Gideon went up by the road of those who dwell in tents on the east of Nobah and Jogbehah. And he attacked the army while the camp fell secure. Then Zebah and Zalmunna fled. He pursued that, and he took the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and routed the whole army. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from the battle, from the ascent of Heres. And he caught a young man of the men of Sukkot and interrogated him. And he wrote down for him the leaders of Sukkot and its elders, 77 men. Then he came to the men of Sukkot and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you ridiculed me, saying, 'Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your weary men?' And he took the elders of the city, the thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Sukkot. Then he tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. And he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, 'What kind of men were they whom you killed at table? So they answered, as you are, so were they. Each one resembled the son of a king. Then he said, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you. And he said to Jether, his firstborn, rise, kill them. But the youth would not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. So Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and kill us, for as man is, so is his strength. So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent ornaments that were on their camels' necks. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son, and your grandson also, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Then Gideon said to them, I would like to make a request of you that each of you would give me the earrings from his plunder. For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. So they answered, we will gladly get them. And they spread out the garments, and each man threw into it the earrings from his plunder. Now, the weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments, pendants, and purple robes which were on the kings of Midian, and besides the chains that were around the camels' necks. Then Gideon made it into an ephod and set it up in his city, Ophrah. And all Israel played the harlot with him. It became a snare to Gideon and to his house. Thus Midian was subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted their heads no more. And the country was quiet 40 years in the days of Gideon. Then Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. Gideon had 70 sons who were his own offspring, for he had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, whose name he called Abimelech. Now Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age, and was buried in the tomb of Joash his father, in Ophrah of the Zerites. So it was, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals, and made Baal Berith their god. Thus the children of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. Nor did they show the kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, Gideon, in accordance with the good he had done for Abraham.
So we need to identify who the enemy here is, first of all. So it says Ishmaelites is where they got the gold from. So the Ishmaelites were in part with the Midianites. So let's identify who are the Midianites. Genesis 25:2 tells us that after Sarah died, Abraham took a wife named Keturah, and Keturah bore Abraham Zimran, Jokshan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. That's 25:2 Genesis. So we need to understand that God will use our family members, our cousins, our distant relatives in opposition when we are unfaithful, as he did with Gideon and Israel. Now, we also need to remember, and Gideon really makes this very, very clear. When you fight a battle and you overcome and you prevail, remember that it's only a battle. No matter how successful it is, it's never the end of the war. Second Chronicles 20:15 tells us, "Do not fear or be dismayed because of the great multitude, for the battle is not yours but God's." The same way, 1 Corinthians tells us 1 Corinthians 15:57 tells us, "But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." The only person who can end a war is God. That is the only person who can end a war, is the God that redeemed us. When you fight for the Lord, you become a target to those who oppose him. In the prime cases, you look at how the adulation went. It's almost like a temptation for Gideon. We want to make you the king. We want you and your sons to rule over us. When you do something for the Lord and there's a success, there's a trend that people suddenly want to lift up that person and his family because he's done something good for the Lord. And rather than God being given the praise, they give the praise to a man. Gideon is a prime example of that. A victory also means greater reliance on God, not reliance on the strength of your victory. It's very easy for us to become confused when God gives us victory in a battle to lose track that it was him that prevailed and not us in any special way. And that is a struggle for any leader, for any teacher, for any person that is trying to be a person that disciples. That whatever your successes, whatever your failures are, you have to give glory to God. You have to be fully reliant on him. In Gideon, we see this very error. Likewise, when you teach someone, watch out. When you disciple someone, be careful, because there's a tendency on that end for them to lift you up and pretend you're wise. You're not. Whatever wisdom you have, it's been given to you. 1 Corinthians 10:12 says, "So you think you are standing firm, be careful that you do not fall." When we have our victories, when we have our successes, not only are we the target, but our pride is puffed up. When we fall, and if we fall, depends on how much we're carrying as opposed to how much we're giving the Lord to carry. In Judges 8, Gideon is told, but Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my sons rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." And he said, "I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder." It was a custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. They answered, "We'll be glad to give them." So they spread out a garment, and each of them threw a ring from his plunder onto it. The weight of the gold rings he asked for came to 1,700 shekels, not counting the ornaments, the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the king of Midian, or the chains that were on the camels' necks. Gideon made the gold into an ephod, and he placed it in Orpha, his town. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. Take special attention to the earrings that they looted from the Midianites. They wanted to make Gideon king and have his sons rule over them. Gideon wanted the Lord to rule over them, yet the instrument that he calls as tribute was used to lead both the nation and himself astray. Those plunders belonged not to Gideon, not to the victors, but to the Lord. Again, we need to remember what James tells us. In James 3:1, he says, my brethren, let not many be masters, knowing that we shall receive greater condemnation. Some versions say teachers. This is the JKV 2020, I think. It says masters. Any person that's placed in a position, we need to realize that just like Gideon, if we lead others astray, just like Solomon, when he sets up all the idols after he's apostatized, we are under more judgment. Our judgment is not like someone who's just being led to these things. In Joshua 7:120, we have another example of where the plunder was the downfall spiritually of a victorious army. But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to devoted things. Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah, took some of them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth Avan, to the east of Bethel, and told them, go out and spy out the region. So the men went up and spied out Ai. When they returned to Joshua, they said, not all of the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men and take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there. So about 3,000 men went up, and they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At the heart of the people, the heart of the people melted in fear and became like water. Then Joshua tore his clothes, fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining till evening. The elders of Israel did the same, and they sprinkled dust on their head. And Joshua said, alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us from the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your great name? And the Lord said to Joshua, stand up. What are you doing on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions. That is why Israel cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. Go consecrate the people. Tell them to consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. These things are devoted among you, Israel. You cannot stand against your enemy until you remove them. In the morning, present yourselves tribe by tribe. The tribe the Lord chooses shall come forward, clan by clan, and the clan the Lord chooses shall come forward, family by family. And the family the Lord chooses shall come forward, man by man. Whoever is caught with devoted things shall be destroyed by fire, along with all the things to him. He has violated the covenant of the Lord, and the Lord has done an outrageous thing in Israel. Early the next morning, Joshua and Israel came forward, tribe, and Judah was chosen. The clan of Judah came out, and the Zerahites were chosen. The clan of the Zerahites came forward by family, and Zimri was chosen. Joshua had his family come forward, man by man, and Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, the tribe of Judah, was chosen. Then Joshua said to Achan, my son, give glory to God, the God of Israel, and honor him. Tell me what you have done, and do not hide it from me. Achan replied, it is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw the plunder, a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a gold bar weighing 50 shekels. I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath. With Achan, we see the same sin as Gideon. Gideon took the tribute and it was misused to set up an altar to a foreign god, an ephod. It was like a priest's raiments that he set up to be worshipped, and it caused everyone to worship the wrong thing. In the same way, Achan worshipped the beautiful robe by coveting it. He also worshiped the wealth and the silver and the bar of gold weighing 50 shekels. As we covet, it is like we are also wanting things that are forbidden. We also see this same illustration of setting up wrong idols when you hear about the way that Gideon not only set them up, he is a picture of Solomon, who in turn is a picture of the false prophet. Gideon is a man of God who was greatly favored by God, a military general, and yet in his capacity to do the Lord's will, Satan also sifted him to do evil. Like him, we need to be very careful how we walk with the Lord and how we do what we do. We are now going to move on to the next little bit we have for this lesson. Someone please read 1 Samuel 16, 1 through 13. 1 through 13.
First Samuel 16.
Yep. 1 through 13.
Now the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I rejected him from the being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse, the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself among your sons. But Samuel said, how can I go? When Saul hears of it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. You shall invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint for me the one whom I designate to you. So Samuel did what the Lord said and came to Bethlehem. And the elders of the city came trembling to meet him and said, do you come in peace? He said, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. He also consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they entered, he looked at Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God sees not as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. Next, Jesse made Shammah pass by. And he said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. Thus Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. But Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these. And Samuel said to Jesse, are these all the children? He said, There remains yet the youngest, and behold, he is tending the sheep. Then Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes. So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily down upon David from that day forward. And Samuel arose and went to Ramah.
Thank you, RJ. Okay, now before we kind of dissect that part, who wants to read 1 Samuel, the whole chapter 17?
Samuel. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah, and they camped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes Damim. Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and camped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array to encounter the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, while Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was clothed with scale armor which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. He also had bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron. His shield carrier also walked before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, why do you come out to draw up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us. Again the Philistines said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And Jesse was old in the days of Saul, advanced in years among men. The 3 older sons of Jesse had gone after Saul to the battle, and the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and the second to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. Now the 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock at Bethlehem. The Philistine came forward morning and evening for 40 days and took his stand. Then Jesse said to David his son, take now for your brothers an ephah of this roasted grain and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to your brothers. Bring also 10 cuts of cheese to the commander of their 1,000, and look into the welfare of your brothers, and bring back news of them. For Saul and they and all the men of Israel are in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. So David arose early in the morning and left the flock with a keeper, and took the supplies and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the circle of the camp while the army was going out in battle array, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle array, army against army. Then David left his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line and entered in order to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath, named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke the same words, and David heard them. When all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. The men of Israel said, have you seen this man who is coming up? Surely he is coming up to defy Israel. And it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God?" The people answered him in accord with this word, saying, "Thus it will be done for the man who kills him." Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the man. And Eliab's anger burned against David, and he said, "Why have you come down, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart, for you have come down in order to see the battle." But David said, "What have I done now? Was it not just a question?" Then he turned away from him to another and said the same thing, and the people answered the same thing as before. When the words which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine." Then Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant was tending his father's sheep, when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock. I went out after him and attacked him and rescued from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Then Saul clothed David with his garments and put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with the armor. David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said to Saul, "I cannot go with this, for I have not tested them." And David took them off. He took his stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's bag, which he had even in his pouch, and his sling was in his hand. And he approached the Philistine. Then the Philistine came on and approached David with the shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy with a handsome appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine also said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, and that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." Then it happened when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him, but there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. The men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the slain Philistines lay along the way to Sharaim, even to Gath and Ekron. The sons of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines and plundered their camps. Then David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his weapons in his tent. Now when Saul saw David going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this young man?" And Abner said, "By your life, O king, I do not know." The king said, "You inquire whose son the youth is." So when David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head in his hand. Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite."
Okay, well, thank you, Luana, for reading that. Couple of things I want to point out. In 1 Samuel 16, it tells us, so Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. And then Samuel went to Ramah. In the same way, I'm also going to say in 1 Samuel 17, 2-3, Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah, drew up their battle lines to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and Israelites another, with the valley between them. Notice that conflict happens when we go from a high point, an anointing, or a special move of the Spirit into a valley, into a low point, into a place of challenging, a place of trial. Satan and his forces will always be camped opposite of the camp of God. In Matthew 3:16, we're shown very, very specifically, as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went out of the water. At that moment, heaven was open, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and lighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." And then if we go to Matthew 4, verses 1 and 2, and Jesus was led by the Spirit into wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The testing of our faith happens in wilderness and in the valleys of our life. Much like when we come down from the mountaintop, when we come down from being with the Lord, Moses, he's seen the hand of God make the law. He's seen these amazing things. He spent time with the Lord in communion. And what is the first thing he comes down to see? He sees the Israelites making a golden calf and worshiping another god. On the mountain, our faith is confirmed. And in the valley, our faith is tested. What should we say is faith is really the word faithful, the Hebrew word emunah. When I say faith, I'm speaking of the word emunah, which is also a word that if you translate from Hebrew, it's not only he has faith in something, he's also faithful to that faith. Now in 1 Samuel 17:28, when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, his anger was burning at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." Romans 11, verse 11 tells us, "I say then, have they submitted that we should fall? God forbid, but rather through their fall, salvation comes onto the Gentiles, for to provoke them to jealousy." In the same way, Eliab is being provoked by his own cowardice to take up. If he had the faith of David, he would have done the deeds of David, but he did not. He was a much more practical man that was living his life according to what he could understand. When we're filled with the Spirit, walking in faith, we can provoke others to jealousy. Others who do not have that same measure of faith that we have. In Matthew 25:21, the Lord said unto him, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of thy Lord. David was faithful in the few things. He was faithful to bring the food to his brothers. He was faithful to listen to his father. He was faithful to know the Lord anointed him to do great things in Israel, and he lived his life accordingly. That being said, he entered into the joy of thy Lord. That is where we need to live. Entering into the joy that comes from knowing we have someone that's with us, that our strength will no longer be the explanation for our success, but our weakness becomes our greatest testimony, because we say, despite ourselves, the Lord has brought us to victory. In the same way, we look at Eliab's heart and we can see a reflection many times over. In Genesis 37, 9 through 11, it's talking about Joseph. Joseph, then he had a dream and he told his brothers, listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come down and bow to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Imagine how great a gift it was for Joseph to have the ability to literally see future events in a dream. And yet the moment in which he shared this vision, his brothers despised him for it. This tremendous miracle, this tremendous gift, and which could have changed things for them. They despised it because they saw nothing but a boy with an overactive imagination. They did not realize God's anointing was on Joseph. In the same way, Eliab did not realize, and think about it this way, Eliab had the benefit of seeing the prophet of God, Samuel, come and anoint David with oil. And yet, rather than rejoicing that his brother was anointed by the Lord, you can see the jealousy come out at this battle. 1 Corinthians 1 through 27 says, but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. David appeared to be foolish. David appeared to be weak. Joseph appeared to be foolish. Joseph appeared to be weak. Yet in both cases, it was a reflection of Christ. Christ, who we are not even supposed to be attracted to him by the standards of what men say are important, power, wisdom. Yet all of these things he was despised because he came from such a humble background. In fact, they made fun because he almost had an accent. Isn't this man from Nazareth? How can anything good come from Nazareth? These are all things that they held the Son of God in contempt for. And yet we can see plainly, God uses David, God uses Joseph. David is the foolish thing, David is the weak thing by man's vision, but that is not how God sees. The next thing we need to really talk about is the spiritual foe, how it manifests in this particular case. And this is not to say that every single time Satan will manifest in the same way, but it's a good measure of how he appears. Now, in verse 4 of 1 Samuel 17, it says, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head. He wore a coat of armor weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves. A bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Notice his height, 6 cubits. And the iron point weighed 600 shekels. What do we have as far as weapons that we know Goliath had? He had a helmet, coat, bronze greaves, a javelin, a shield, and a sword. So you have another 6. So you have a 6, 606. 666 right in front of us. Goliath is an image and a mode in which Satan attacks believers. Satan always comes in 2 forms. The tempter always comes in 2 forms. The adversary always comes in 2 forms. One is a seducing serpent, like the one in the garden, whispering for us to become gods by making ourselves gods, or trying to seduce us away from the truth that is in God's word. The other one is the undefeatable dragon, the giant within the valley that no rational man will say, you've got a chance. It's a very interesting aspect that God would send a young man with just a sling to fight Goliath. Think about the view from the camp of the Philistines. They see this young child almost like a joke coming out to die. And in the Israelite camp, they must have been asking the question, man, is this the best we can send? Look at that guy. Look at how great he is. In the same way, the world looks at us and says, this is the best that God can provide. These are the people God uses, these insignificant people. Why wouldn't they always ask the same questions too? They say, why wouldn't God use someone famous? Why wouldn't God use someone with a lot of followers? Why wouldn't God use like an actor or a politician to do his will? To do his will. Why does he use these nobodies? Well, again, humans judge by their eyes. They look at something and they make a judgment based upon worldly things. Yet God does not see us in that light. He never have and he never will. More to the point, we need to understand that in Revelations 12:9, it gives us that image of Goliath. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the world astray, was hurled down to earth, and his angels with him. So look, even in this verse, we're said he comes as a great dragon hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. And that is how he acts even to this day. The Antichrist will be sent to seduce the world to the good deeds he does. And when he becomes the adulation and commands the praise, like a Gideon, like a David, like a Solomon, when people start saying, we want you and your children to rule over us, then he becomes that dragon, that unbeatable thing, which no one says. In fact, it says in Revelation, who can stand against the beast? He's given power to overcome all his opponents. We should always keep that in mind. But greater is the God we serve than man's assessment of who we are and who the world says we are. So my encouragement to everyone here tonight is remember those Goliaths in your life, whether it be a diagnosis from a doctor, whether it be a troubled relationship that's going to lead to some hard times, whether it be a loss of a job, whether it be a death of a loved one, whether it be illness, whether it be heartbreak, whether it be what seems to be something we can't even deal with. The Lord has already won the victory. He has overcome the world. So what are our problems compared to he that has overcome? So rather than trusting in your strength and your abilities, how much greater should we give over to Jesus the glory for those victories that will come as long as we continue to trust and follow him? That's what I got for you this week. That's all I got, unfortunately. Hello, and thank you for watching Moriel TV. There are so many things that are happening at Moriel Ministries worldwide, from the Philippines to Japan to India to Africa and back to Europe and the United States. So many of our brothers and sisters are spreading the good news of Jesus Christ to this lost world. We are so thankful for your prayers. God has been faithful and has blessed us in so many ways. If you'd like to partner with our efforts abroad and at home, please take a moment to click the link in the description and help us as the Lord leads you. Thank you very much, and God bless.